we take a look at the teams that will be competing in this first series? There you go on the left there. João, how did you say you pronounce that? You did it perfectly, right?
Joaquin.
Joaquin.
Joaquin, as in Joaquin Phoenix.
Gotcha. Joaquin, PNC, now Gudan, and Pincher versus Frosty, Citizen Napper, Akumaker, and Ginger Ninja. And again, it's not a star-studded lineup entirely for Australia. Akumaker is the big name on the team there this year. Formerly known as Shaman, currently known as Shaman. It always confuses me which way round it is.
It's, you know, it's either Akumaker or John from Melbourne, Australia, as he would say himself, I believe. But yeah, as you said, not a super flashy lineup, but just a very solid one, I would say. Indeed, Citizen Napper, after his, respectable HCT performance last year, and Frosty and Ginger Ninja as primarily, Twitch memers and streamers, as well as strong ladder performers. But the real star players, I would say, from this particular series come on the other side, from Argentina. PNC and Nalguidan are two of... They just kind of have to be, at least before a couple months ago, the two best South American players. I think there was not really any argument. Now, with race thrown into the mix, it gets a little bit more complicated. Still, PNC, on Team Genji, putting up incredible amount of points so far in this season, and the last one as well. I think he is still in with a very good shot of being called the best South American player.
Sounds like we're just about ready to get this series started, so let's take a look at the picks and the bans. Those of you just joining us for the Hearthstone Global Games for the first time, this is how the picks and bans phase works. It's that both teams ban one of their opponent's classes first, then they pick two that they want to play, then they ban two, pick two, ban one, pick one. This doesn't represent the queue order, but it represents which classes they're allowed to play in the series out of the 9.
That's right, and obviously, as you mentioned, all 9 classes have to be brought. But although all 9 may be brought, you do not always get to see all 9, because Druid being banned right at the start is a very common occurrence. And I have to be honest, with some of the Druid cards we've seen out of the Boomsday project, I don't think that will be stopping anytime soon with all the gloop that's going to be thrown about in this meta. But as we said, some pretty expected bans there. The Druid is a very strong class at the moment against pretty much every kind of deck you're going to be throwing down. And then right at the bottom, with the Taunt Warrior on both sides being the last class being chosen, forced to pick it because it's not being banned, because Warrior is just pretty decidedly the worst class in global games at the moment.
Yeah, something curious about Druid as well. We're talking about how strong it is. One of the Druids is Token Druid, the other one's Malagos Druid, and they both ate up the first ban, which just goes to show how good that class is. But this is what happens next. Both teams blind pick which class they'd like to queue up first, and then they see their opponent's class, and then they queue the next one, and then the next one, until we have our matches. So first up, it's going to be Pincher on the Hunter, Death Battle Hunter, versus Ginger Ninja on the Control Priest for Australia.
Yeah, that's going to be a very interesting one, because it's a matchup that I have to be perfectly honest, I had some misconceptions about.
We had a big argument about it, all 4 casters, just a few moments ago.
We did indeed, as it seems, when you take a first glance at it, pretty simple. It's an Egg Hunter against a control deck.
Yep.
You should just win. That always seems to get the job done, as you don't have the tools to fight back against their onslaught of board control, as well as face damage that they can fit in. But
however, you kind of do with the control.
Exactly.
Because you've got Psychic Screams, you've got Mass Dispels, you've got Shadow Reaper Anduin later on to deal with any big minions that maybe Rexar have created. But Rexar is where we get really complicated.
Exactly, and I think the main thing in that matchup that swings it more in the priest's way than in other control matchups is your win condition is very strong against the Hunter. If you're as a big spell mage, you're getting a little bit too slow at that point. Your win condition isn't aggressive enough, as with the Taunt Warrior. Those Ragnaros Fireballs aren't aggressive enough. They don't come down quick enough to close out the game. Whereas with the Priest, just a couple of Mind Blasts thrown in there at the end, with no real counterplay to Alexstrasza outside of that Deathstalker Rexar, it gets very shaky very quickly.
And that's the issue. It's just that nice little 2-turn lethal setup. And yes, obviously Rexar can create some lifesteal beasts and attack him with them straight away, but they have to make sure they're healing and also dealing with the Alexstrasza. It can get a little bit dicey as we jump in to the first game of the series. Mulligans are a complicated one here because, again, usually you'd look at Priest and say, Dustbreaker, but with eggs around, maybe Dustbreaker's not the answer.
Yeah, it is not an aggro deck. It seems weird to say in Hunter, as pretty much every Hunter deck since the dawn of time, even when it's called mid-range, to be honest, has been pretty aggressive. But this, as you pointed out, does not play all too many early drops. It's really just focusing on dominating the game around turns 5 and 6 through the use of cubes and Savannah High mains, Play Dead and Terrascale Stalker. But Pincher here clearly thinking all these kind of combo synergy cards like Cube and Terrascale Stalker do not work until they get the real meat of the deck, the eggs, the high mains, something to actually make use out of those Death Rattle cards.
Death Stalker Rexar is a little bit slow to be playing on turn 6, but it's there, and it's a way that Pincher can just take this game by storm, as you mentioned before. And when we were talking amongst the casters, Rexar is such a huge tool in this matchup.
Yeah, I think it's just of the absolute utmost importance here because as we were saying, that is the only counterplay to Priest trying to go for lethal possibilities. And as we see here from Australia going for keeping the Shadow Reaper Android, clearly that is their thinking right from the get-go. They are just trying to win this game through their own win condition as quick as possible.
Pincher doesn't mind burning any of these cards too much, I'd imagine. Witchwood Grizzly better against aggro, not particularly helpful whatsoever against Control Priest, whose hand is likely often going to be full of cards, so I'm not at all surprised to see the Hunter's Mark picked up there.
I wonder if with the new patch, has it gone live now? Are they playing on...
It is live.
Okay.
I believe they are playing on a server that has the new rules in effect.
So, because of that, if I take a look at the list, with a copy of Stitch Tracker in there, Prince Keleseth now does apply the buff through the choosing of a Stitch Tracker minion, which I doubt will come into play, but it could be cool to see the first, realization of the new patch change in a competitive format.
I'm just glad that there's no Azalina in any of these warrior decks tonight, because I had a go earlier on before coming to the studio at the warrior versus Shadowrock Shaman just to see how they do interact.
Yeah.
And it was an easy game. It was a one game for the warrior because Azalina into Shadowrocks is just ridiculous. But it took over an hour because my opponent didn't concede. So we had like 17 full turns of Shadowrock animations. It was ridiculous.
That does sound rather boring, I have to be honest. It also sounded rather boring the entire car ride over, I have to also be honest.
When I described in detail every single turn that took place.
But for Ginger Ninja here, because of his choice to keep Shadow Reaper Andon, and I believe they kept the Master Spell off the mulligan as well, they put themselves in a position where their late game will be very powerful. They've given themselves that certainty with Shadow Reaper Anduin, but their early game has been a little bit lacking. No Clerics, no Pyromancers, none of that good stuff, but I suppose against this deck, that's not really all that important. To be honest, they just need to make sure their late game's powerful enough to close things out, because they're not going to be winning the game through early game dominance. The Hunter will seize things back eventually.
And that's why tools like Psychic Scream and Mass Dispel come in so handy, because the Hunter takes a while to get control of the board, and then when they do, the Priest just screams and they all run away back into the deck. In the meantime, Ginger Ninja can just focus on gathering these resources. And again, you're now seeing why keeping Shadow Reaper Anduin was so valuable in the mulligan. They don't really care about the early game. The mid game, they start to care a little bit, but it's the late game that is important in this matchup. It's almost like a control mirror in a very weird way.
So a very weird turn here for Australia, where Coin into Twilight Drake looks like potentially a very strong play. If the egg is not activated on the following turn, they can just rip the Master Spell. They're very far ahead on board at that point. But then the potential risk with that line of play is if you are met with a Terrascale Stalker or a Play Dead, that play becomes an awful lot worse because your Master Spell just has not done a good enough job in that matchup.
Yeah. Or a Hunter's Mark as well, as we can see there is one present in Argentina's hand. That would have been disastrous if the Twilight Drake came down, because the egg would have just traded into it for free, and Argentina would have had complete control of the board, as they do now. However, with the egg silenced, Twilight Drake isn't looking quite as risky. Then again, with how Master Shore active, everything gets a little bit scary here as Carnivorous Cube drawn from Pincher, and the next few turns this could get nasty. Yeah,
lots of possibilities available now. We've already seen earlier on in the week the power of Carnivorous Cube on exactly Houndmaster Shore. When you play dead on that, all your minions getting rushed. Houndmaster Shore even giving the other Houndmaster Shore's rush. It gets a little bit silly. But they need to be careful about not making high value enough plays, because Deathstalker Rexar, we have said how powerful it can be, but it is a slow card. You're only giving yourself one powerful minion a turn, which usually will give the Priest plenty of time to start swinging the board back in their favor.
So they hovered over the Carnivorous Cube for a second there, and I did like the idea of that, given that a Master Spell had just been played. Psychic Scream still a few turns away yet. Like, Pincher is almost guaranteed to get the value off of it. Obviously decides that he'd rather deal with the Twilight Drake. I'm not sure how I feel about that. What do you think, Derek?
I think it's probably the right way to go, because if you play the cube, what are you actually hitting with it? Houndmaster, sure.
Yeah.
At which point you only have 6 damage on the board. They have a Twilight Drake. They can just heal up each turn, start value trading your board. That's not a game-winningly powerful play.
Okay.
And cube is the core of this deck against control. You need to be doing stuff that's so completely broken
After
that you can
Rexar.
just... Yeah, exactly. After Rexar, after Savannah Highmane, whatever you want.
Yeah.
So completely broken that it can just win the game on its own. And so I like being a little bit more optimistic with the cube, because in this situation, Pincher doesn't really need to do anything until Psychic Scream comes down in a couple turns' time. He's got board control, he's getting in some damage,
And
he's
that,
quite happy.
That actually makes this a pretty tough pick, because you could argue Australia want as many Psychic Screams as possible.
You could.
There's no Mind Blast as an option here, and so the only way of getting a Mind Blast is to take Shadow Visions and play it again, which is quite slow. They go with the third option, which is the Holy Fire. That's sort of the pseudo Mind Blast, I guess.
Yeah, it plays to their strengths in this matchup, if you will, with getting more damage through to face, because their odds of winning this game here are very, very high, I think, if there's no Deathstalker Rexar. That is their thinking here of how they win this game. They just play Shadow Reaper Anduin and pile all the damage they can through to the face.
Highmane completely changes things here, right? Like, Rexar will have been there, one of the main things they consider that turn, but slamming Highmane on 6, again, a turn before Psychic Scream can be played, and getting these early attacks in must be tempting.
It's such a weird situation and shows how powerful Psychic Scream is when you feel kind of bad about playing a 7-6 Highmane on curve off the top. Because if it does get Psychic Screamed away in a couple turns' time and you haven't actually killed them yet, you have to make some very slow plays. Like, at a later date, playing Deathstalker Rexar when you have a clear board is a lot worse than playing Deathstalker Rexar when you're already doing something.
Yeah. There is definitely something to be said for the Carnivorous Cube as well here, as it looks like that's what's coming down. As, yeah, okay, Australia can Psychic Scream it away in a few turns, but it's just free. It goes back into the deck. It can still be used later on.
And this does make... So the reasoning for this, as I see it, is obviously you put more power on the board primarily. But as a secondary reason, Highmane will always just be a good card. You don't need any other conditions, nothing on the board to make it good. And so in this situation, while they have stuff on the board before Psychic Scream comes down, Cube is a great way to get that value while they can.
Yep.
Whereas after Psychic Scream comes down, they just throw down Savannah Highmane and say, you have to answer this.
Yeah, that's true. And things are looking dire for Australia now that Argentina have managed to create this board pressure.
Yeah. And this has been, taking a look at the amount of damage.
15 damage on board right now, including the Argus, obviously.
Oof. But as I was saying, this has been a pretty direct result of Ginger Ninja's decision to go coin into the Master Spell. It was powerful in the immediate because it silenced the egg, but it did take them that one turn further away from Psychic Scream, which they had to realize would be very powerful, because Savannah Highmane on 6, you need coin Psychic Scream to deal with. Cube Play Dead, you need Psychic Scream to deal with. These are not outlandish possibilities to play around. These are pretty expected things that the Death Rattle Hunter will do.
So, is this game actually winnable for Ginger Ninja? Is the big question, because the problem with Psychic Scream now is that
die.
they are just dead to Pincher's weapon.
Yep.
But I'm not seeing any alternative plays in which they do survive, Derek, so I think this game is just over.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it either. And from Pincher here, this feels like it's been a very nice way of maximizing the advantage that he had in this game by going for constant small amounts of pressure. Like, as you said, he had the possibility, as Australia do concede, of going cube on turn 5. Instead, he dealt with the Drake, big tempo swing, fitted in those hero powers whenever he could along the way. And it put him in a situation where he just denied his opponent's most powerful play and got himself a pretty fairly unfavored victory with some very nice play.
Yeah, it was really nice play. I just have to agree with you there, Derek. It should have been an unfavored matchup. I think it's closer than maybe we gave it credit for, because you were saying that you think it's very close or that the Hunter may be a little bit favored. We were saying we think the Priest is quite a bit favored, but at the end of the day, stuff like that can happen. And now that has potentially shaped this series in a rather different way. We were saying, looking at all of the favorable matchups, that maybe Argentina were a little bit favored. But now that they've won this one, it's looking like they are actually a lot favored as we look at which matches are coming up next. It's going to be Joaquin. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just guessing. I haven't asked him how you pronounce that name, but
I trust you, Darren.
It is a name, and that's how you pronounce it.
Joaquin on the Even Warlock versus Citizen Napa on the Taunt Warrior, which should be another favorable matchup for Argentina.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. It's not necessarily a foregone conclusion, though, because as with basically what Evenlock does is on turn 3 and 4, it's kind of like just a check from your opponent that they have to have something to deal with a mountain giant. You just say to them, if you don't have this, the game's over. If you do have an Execute or a Shield Slam, we can play a game of Hearthstone, which the Taunt Warrior has those answers. It has fantastic ways of dealing with those mountain giants if you can find them, which means there's obviously a potential for the Evenlock to just blow out the game with a crazy victory because they do manage to stick those giants. But usually in this matchup, you'll be going a little bit further into the later stages of the game. But I just find even then, the fact that the Taunt Warrior is so low value, such a low curve deck now with all those cheap taunts thrown in there, even when you do complete the quest, they've probably played Blood Reaver Gul'dan by that point, and you're probably just dead.
It's also just a very unpopular deck at the moment. Like, a lot of the teams have been opting to go for Odd Warrior rather than Taunt Warrior this week. Both of the Warriors were picked last in the picks and bans for this series. It just looks as though Warrior has sort of found its way at the bottom of the pile as the weakest power level class. And it's been a tough competition. I mean, looking back at the Hearthstone Global Games last year in the Ungoro meta, there was no question. Warlock was the class that nobody wanted to play.
Right.
Zoo Warlock didn't exist. There was no Evenlock, no Handlock. There was just no good Warlock deck. So the meta has been a lot more neutral now. But now I'm just wondering, Derek, what happens to Warrior once the expansion comes out?
I mean, the primary group of cards that we see added to Warrior are mechs, which could be very interesting indeed. As I was talking about it with you yesterday, where I kind of feel like I'm in the camp where mechs will either be pretty underwhelming because they can't keep up with the aggression of decks like Odd Paladin, or they will just be completely broken. If they are the most powerful thing you can do in the early game, then they will just be insanely powerful, because Magnetic, when you have something on the board, is such a powerful mechanic. It will snowball so quickly, and I, for one, am incredibly excited to try it out.
I'm particularly excited to look at Dr. Boom when it comes to Warrior.
That's true.
Seeing which sort of archetypes get created by Dr. Boom, because obviously all of us have been watching all of the card reviews that have been going on over the last few days and seeing what the guys have to say, but it's very often that some incredibly powerful card just gets missed by everyone in the community, and it only takes one very powerful card to create a whole new archetype, and that's what I'm looking forward to about this expansion.
And when you want to talk about incredibly powerful cards that fly under the radar, who better than Dr. Boom, the card that was given 1 star by Trump, I believe, is one of my original favorite Hearthstone memes, and was just obviously one of the most iconic and powerful cards in Hearthstone. I think maybe it's not quite on the same power level as original Dr. Boom, but the Mad Genius will definitely be fun to play around with.
Why would you ever want to play Dr. Boom instead of Troggs or the Earthinator?
Yeah, it's just strictly worse.
Yeah, in every possible way. I'd rather play Force Tank Max than Dr. Boom myself.
They basically printed another Force Tank Max, haven't they?
They did, yeah. It's much more attack, I think, and a little bit less health. But yeah.
Well, 2 more attack for 1 more mana. It's not the best one. Probably don't play Bulldozer is my hot tip.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm amazed that you're so good at learning the card names, Derek.
Bulldozer has great art. Like, it's literally a bull with bulldozers on its ears.
Hang on, so you just said the card's bad, but you said it's got great art.
Yeah.
That sums it up, right?
Yeah, fair enough. It does actually have great art, though. It's not just a meme.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, we're just talking for a little bit longer, guys, because the players aren't quite ready to start the game. They will be shortly. I'm just excited to see Dr. Boom because, for me, it should shape kind of quite a few different warrior types, because there may be this aggressive mech version or this sort of curve mech version. There might be a more control-y, fatiguey version that can somehow run Dr. Boom. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it runs Garrosh. Maybe it runs both. Who knows? There's going to be quite a few days of experimenting before HCT Germany happens next weekend. That's going to be a good tournament to watch.
It really is. There's a lot of fantastic players there, very strong deck builders. Even Tice, who qualified, it's great to see him back in the the competitive Hearthstone circuit, because we know when it comes to pretty crazy decks, Tice is your boy.
Yep, Tice definitely. I mean, on his stream, he shows off a lot of the new creative decks. I caught him playing some Wild as well recently. He's a
You got him.
Jack.
Caught red-handed.
Jack of all trades. That's not going to help him out too much when it comes to HCT Germany, but I mean, Tice is just one of these players that does it all, right? Like, he goes off, does his stream, comes back, tries to qualify for one tournament, does it first try. He's like modern-day Kalento.
I mean,
it's a slight exaggeration.
Kalento's also like modern-day Kalento. He just qualified for Europe playoffs.
Yeah, I'm not arguing with you, but Kalento is still Kalento. And very modern.
Tice is also just Kalento.
Tice is also just Kalento.
Yeah, okay.
we got there.
Good
we got
meme.
there. Anyways, it looks like this game is almost ready to start. I think I'm just seeing in the corner of my eye production are telling the players to start right now. So bringing it back to the game at hand. Even Warlock versus Taunt Warrior. Giant on 3, Giant on 4, Twilight Drake on 5 win the game? Is that how it works?
Well, that's the ideal plan. Obviously, in Even Warlock, sometimes you have to piece together a little bit more of a ragtag win condition. But as with all of these odd and even decks, you are just afforded such a high amount of consistency because your hero power just becomes so much better. You can spam that as much as you possibly can in the early turns, then follow up with some very powerful plays. But it has to be said here, for Australia, this is such an important win for them if they can take this, because this is not a great matchup for them, I would say, but they're still in with a good shot here. And if they can win this, they're in with a chance. I think if Argentina take this second game, though, they are just in an almost unlosable position from that point.
Yeah, on paper, according to my notes, this should have been a series that goes to Game 5 and Argentina should have then won, but that was based on the logic that Austria win Game 1. Yes. So already, throw those notes out of the window as we jump in to game number 2. It's not Treads Red, it's not Boston, pretty sure about that, but we'll get that fixed for you any moment now, as Mountain Giant is present in Joaquin's hand.
Yeah, fantastic way to get things rolling. Even something like an Acidic Swamp Ooze isn't necessarily the worst, but you kind of want that a little bit later on to deal with either the Garrosh Shadowmourne weapon ideally, or even just Sulfuras is not a terrible weapon to get rid of whatsoever. But obviously Mountain Giant, Twilight Drake, definitely what you're looking for in those early turns. But on the other side, Australia, in that kind of DPS check, if you will, that you often find in video games where it's just if you can't get past this, you're not allowed to play the rest of the game. They got double execute, so plenty of ways to deal with those big giant minions that Joaquin will be throwing down. If, however, they can find an activator. Double execute, but no kind of Blood Razor to activate it quite yet is still a little bit scary.
Yeah, little taunts like Phantom Militia, I guess, if desperate, could activate the execute, but I'm really reaching here. It's 2 more turns until threat check number 1 hits the board. I very much doubt Argentina will be tempted to drop the Homunculus here.
Oh yeah, I mean, next turn you can just go 2-drop Hero Power and you're still on curve for a turn 4 Giant, because obviously you're not on the coin, so turn 4 is the earliest you're going to be getting down one of those massive threats. But for Citizen Nappa here, they do have the ability to get down one of those nice early executes with the Blood Razor now picked up.
Yeah, not on the turn the Mountain Giant comes down, though, which is the issue. It's going to actually take 2 turns, 1 turn to develop the Blood Razor, and the second turn to actually cast the Execute. I mean, that's now no longer the case because the Ooze has been played as well. Austria can feel free to coin out the Blood Razor, deal with the Ooze, which is a nice little bit of irony there, and then next turn on the backswing, execute the Mountain Giant. As we just saw Brazil take the first game against Singapore there. Again, their Swiss score is also 2-0, so the winner will be 3-0, joining the elite, such as Ukraine, in the very tippity top of the Hearthstone Global Games bracket.
And that's one that I I really just want both teams to win because Brazil, having cast both Copa Americas so far, having met Race at the Summer Championships, who's a very, very lovely guy indeed. They're just two teams that I have a lot of vested interest in personally, but Singapore, because of the fact that they are just so passionate whenever you see them take a victory. It means so much to them as one of the lesser renowned teams. It would be cool to see either one of them go up 3-0.
Well, I'm sorry, Derek. They cannot both win.
I know.
That is not how this works. As we just saw, that Citizen Napa did not develop the Blood Razor, but I suspect that was because of the Slam pickup there at the end. Now, if a Giant does come down, Slam plus Execute will do the job just fine.
Yeah, pretty easy play. You're not throwing down a Phantom Militia in this matchup for just a 2-4 because contesting the board against a 3-2 doesn't really matter. You need to do something a little bit more impressive with it later on because just kind of throwing away 2 activations on the quest by playing the Phantom Militia on turn 3 rather than turn 9 feels like a little bit of a waste.
Yeah, I mean, the alternative that I was describing was the Blood Razor play just to set up for the Execute, but as we said, Slam sort of does that for them now. They're going to have to think about this, though, because it's a Twilight Drake that's come down, not a Giant. So actually, they may want to consider how important this Drake is to deal with. It is only 4 damage.
Yeah, lovely sequencing of threats here from Joaquin. It's something you're very often going to be seeing in the Even Warlock, is you start off with the lesser threatening minion, because if they decide not to clear it off waiting for the Mountain Giant, you've stuck a Twilight Drake on the board and you're smacking them for 4 every turn, which then in turn not only gets you in that little bit of chip damage at the start to start closing out the game later on, it also nullifies the power of Shield Slam, because there are not quite so many burst armor gain effects in this deck when your Dry Whisker Armorer probably won't be doing all too much. You don't have Bring It On to bump it up to the really high power levels. So this Shield Slam, unless they clear off this Twilight Drake, will be pretty bad for quite a long time.
It won't be unplayable, though, because it's worth noting Joaquin doesn't run Skulking Geist in his deck. Instead, he runs 1 copy of Mossy Horror in his Even Warlock, which will be great against a board of Phantom Militia.
It would indeed. Interesting then that they decide to put in a Mossy Horror into their Even Lock, which is obviously, to an extent, a tech against the Token Druid. Oh no, Australia are the ones bringing Malagos Druid. Okay, Argentina are on the Taunt Druid. Okay, no, that does make sense. I was going to say if they were teching against the Token Druid, it would be a bit strange to then ban it, but yeah. With the Malagos Druid there, it makes a lot of sense to ban away it.
And there we go, now the Mountain Giant has come down. It's a little bit more awkward to deal with. Armor up, Shield Slam, Execute is an option, but that's... Then again, you did say that the Shield Slam is unlikely to be that valuable later on anyway. Maybe this is the best use for it.
I'm looking a little bit more closely at Blood Razor Coin Execute, as it does look like that's what they're lining up.
That way takes out both threats as well.
Yeah, very nice way to clear up the board. Start just actually doing some stuff of your own, because this is the weird thing about Even Lock. Pretty much every other deck in Hearthstone just gets incrementally more powerful as the game goes on. Even Warlock has a power spike on turns 3 and 4, sometimes 5, and then for a couple of turns, doesn't really do much most of the time unless you happen to get both Twilight Drakes and both Mountain Giants at the top of your deck. About as good as they can
get. They've even got 22 health already and Hooked Reaver in hand. So
yeah, that's pretty
don't think that this aggression is going to stop from Argentina anytime soon.
But yeah, usually here from Australia, I think on average they would kind of have deserved a break until turn 8 when cards like the Lich King start to come down, or they can go double 4-drop, which gets a little bit scary. But obviously in this scenario, they've used both Executes already on a Drake and a Mountain Giant, and with 2 left to come, they're going to have to do something pretty fancy with this Brawl if they're going to want to stabilize in this game, I would say.
So how does Joaquin structure the coming turns? Like, which sequence of threats would he prefer to play? He's gone with the Giant now. Is that so that he can fit in the tap and start doing things like this?
Yes, it is to fit in the taps, get himself closer to that Hooked Reaver, which you mentioned, which could come down next turn, actually, with Homunculus tap into Hooked Reaver. But also, you've seen 2 Executes now. You pretty much have full reign to just play the biggest thing you can each turn now. You've seen pretty much the majority of any kind of removal the Warrior's going to throw down until Brawl becomes active. So you just start loading up your biggest threats and try to close things out in the mid-game.
That's the wrong 6-drop. I was hoping for Mossy Horror here. No, I wasn't. Joaquin was hoping for Mossy Horror here, maybe. I just wanted to kind of see it.
So with 10 cards in hand. We could see Vulgar Homunculus tap into Hooked Reaver if he wanted to make the strongest possible play onto the board in terms of attack power. That's not necessarily something he wants to be moving towards, though, because then he's in this situation where his hand starts to look a lot more flimsy after a brawl comes down.
What about potentially Defile plus Hellfire? It does clear that Joaquin's own Homunculus, but also allows them to push 11 damage to the face this turn. And also, how good actually is Hellfire in this matchup or Defile? They're not going to be that valuable later on. Maybe this is the best use of the cards.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Hellfire could be fairly good in this matchup, clearing off something like a Chain Gang later on, or just the vast majority of taunts that are actually going to be played. But in this instance, where your opponent has used both executes, you have no other minions on board. I think I agree with you here, Falk, where leaving one strong minion on board just leaves you so less vulnerable to brawl that it kind of has to be worth it.
Joaquin can just pretty much sequence one threat at a time. After this, it's a 6/6, then or a 7/7 with taunt rather, then a 6/6.
I like that a lot more.
Even if they put 2 threats down on one turn, it's not the end of the world. If that baits out a brawl and that's all Citizen Nappa does that turn, big deal.
Right. As again, still the potential on this turn, unless the Tar Creeper comes down as well, for Argentina to attack through with Spellstone and Spellbreaker on this turn to get everything through to face, as it does look like Australia are going to be digging with that Battle Rage.
They have to. They've been put on the back foot for the second game in a row, and it was around this turn, the last game, that they were finished off. Looks like we could be in a similar position.
Yeah, and they are pretty clearly here going for optimistic plays. I suppose by bringing the Giant down to 3, Hellfire no longer actually becomes a possibility. It would have to be Shroom into Hellfire for this to connect face. But with Australia being so far on the back foot, as you pointed out, they need to be making these kind of plays where their opponent doesn't have exact combos of cards.
Silence plus Spellstone is an exact combo of cards that would allow this Giant to push face one more time, putting Australia down to 6. However, Australia now have double shield block in hand, and that shield slam, which is now looking like it can be utilized effectively, at least to deal with the Mountain Giant. Put Citizen Nappa back on a reasonable health total.
And they've also just got Scourge Lord Garrosh, which feels like a fantastic play on this turn to me, just to shut out any possibility of this Giant going face again.
Yeah, that's a little bit better. Gain 5, put the weapon into the Spellbreaker, deal with the whole board, and up on 7 health.
All of a sudden then, although it's unlikely to be a play that comes into effect, if your opponent had a hand that wasn't literally all minions to throw on the board, you could maybe start to outvalue them on board here and push for some damage, because Shadowmourne is now 8 damage that could go face, a couple of Tar Creepers and Stonehill. It's not a lot of attack, but it could get you in a position where as soon as you do complete that quest, you can finish out the game very quickly indeed.
But Joaquin has everything he could possibly want, even both Shroom Brewers to heal him back up again. I suspect this turn will be a combination of 1 threat plus Homunculus, just about... actually, no, there's no need to play the Homunculus, is there? The Shadowmourne would just get a free kill, though. So, just big threat. Could maybe taunt it with the Sunfury Protector. That's not quite so bad.
Yeah, that's a good point. Obviously, no Silence knocking about in the Warrior deck to speak of. As you mentioned, a way to get a couple of minions on board without leaving your opponent available to take value trades. But finally, with that double shield block in hand, Australia can start to utilize this shield block, shield slam, sorry, which has just been knocking about in their hand right from the get-go, start to take those value trades or just fight back for the board, which they really have to do in this scenario.
And it's actually just a really easy board clear here, isn't it, with the double shield block, shield slam, and hero power after trading with the Sunfury Protector to deal with everything. It doesn't mean that Citizen Nappa ends up with something on the board, though. So it looks like they're going to hold back the second shield block. The problem with that is that they can't deal with the Sunfury Protector if they take that route.
Yeah, Sunfury Protector on the board isn't the end of the world. It leaves them a little bit more vulnerable to Hellfire, obviously, after there would be an attack and a trade.
Well, these aren't great taunts. I guess Ornery Diehorn
that's what I'm looking at as well.
As bulky as it gets here.
Tarlord just not aggressive enough, I think, in this scenario.
Tarlord has one attack.
That's not very aggressive.
That's, yeah. That's all I need to see.
And the other benefit here of actually leaving up a Sun Fury Protector is it's something to attack into. They cannot play those big threats unless they taunt them up at the same time, because Sun Fury Protector will be knocking about, able for Citizen Napper to trade into with the Shadowmourne.
However, Hooked Reaver, again, is active this turn. It will be a 7/7. Argentina could even play that and the Dread Infernal and position the Sun Fury Protector in the middle, making for a very awkward weapon swing. The problem is then 3 minions on the board. Is that too weak for a brawl? Well, they are going to be following up with Gul'dan, so maybe they don't care if it gets brawled.
I mean, they're very possibly considering a Gul'dan on this turn, because you've already seen a little bit of armor gain from the shield block. They've changed their hero powers, so those Gul'dan hero powers will be very scary very quickly indeed. But I do get the suspicion that that's a little bit too low of a play onto the board. Like you said, if they go for minion development on this turn, then follow up with the Blood Reaver Gul'dan, it first of all forces their opponent to actually have the brawl, and then if they do have the brawl, they've just got a strong follow-up.
Wow, rather than going with Dread Infernal, going to go with the Black Knight instead, just as aggressive a turn as they possibly can. And now, I mean, it looks like it's almost got to be brawl this turn. Yep.
Very easy brawl here for Citizen Napper, just hoping...
If the Reaver lives, this is not good.
Yeah, it's very, very bad indeed.
Oh,
as the Hooked Reaver is the minion that ends up surviving here. Citizen Napper just cannot catch a break in this game.
No, Team Australia are really struggling with the series entirely, actually. As I guess their only line of defense is, what, a Tark Reaper? Maybe they shield block and hope for the second shield slam, but they're not winning the game with these cards.
And just all kind of alarm bells have to be ringing. Because Argentina used the Black Knight on a Stonehill defender on the last turn, you have to be expecting either Spellbreaker or a very big Spellstone to take out whatever taunt you put in the way, or they would not use it on such a low value target.
Yeah.
I must choose.
So is that just lethal if Tark Reaper comes down? No, not quite. Joaquin's missing 2 damage. Or missing 1 damage, rather. They've got the Dread Infernal. But then putting the Warrior that's already lost its armor up hero power down to 1, probably not the worst thing. As, yeah, digging for... I can only assume digging for the shield slam there, not getting rewarded. And, yeah, some damage is about to be coming in.
Yeah, and I think you can fairly happily go for Blood Reaver Gul'dan now. I suppose, actually, after you've seen the brawl, going for an even stronger play onto the board, pushing your advantage, doesn't seem that bad at all.
I mean,
you'd only be resurrecting 1 demon, I think. Oh, no, sorry. Dread Infernal and a Vulgar Homunculus.
Yep. And the... yeah. But the thing is, if they now go for the strongest board possible, including the Dread Infernal, potentially including the Homunculus as well, although healing of the Hooked Reaver is fine too, if this now gets brawled away, then Gul'dan comes out, and then that should just be the game.
Yeah. I think I can respect pushing the advantage here off board. It's, again, it's just making your opponent have the brawl, which they very possibly just don't have.
Or 3 taunt minions. That does enough, right? Especially if one of them is Sao Knight Chain Gang. Sao Knight Chain Gang double Tark Reaper is enough to protect Citizen Napper for now. Buys them another turn anyway. Oh!
Yeah, I mean, if they go for triple taunt here, what does that actually do? They get value traded, value traded, value traded, and then they have to go for brawl on a subsequent turn anyway. As the Sao Knight Chain Gang does end up winning the brawl, finally,
slightly better
for Citizen Napper.
Yeah.
Lady Luck starting to swing back their way as I mentioned earlier on, Shadowmourne is a non-zero amount of damage they can push towards the face.
Mossy Horror! It's obviously not getting played this time. That is Mossy Horror. Both brawls are gone. Gul'dan is looking pretty good to me. The only problem is their low health total, but they'll be at 15, and there's only 6 damage on the board. The quest is 5 out of 7, so it's unlikely that's being completed and that the hero power is going face this turn. So Gul'dan just looks very good to me.
I'm trying to think, has a Vulgar Homunculus actually died this game?
Yes.
I'm not sure if it has.
Was one not played back on turn 3, tap Homunculus? Maybe not.
No, it was Tap Ooze.
Yeah, you're right. No.
Yeah.
Then in that case, no, one has not been played yet this turn.
In that case, it does leave them a little bit vulnerable to the amount of attack that can come through here, because if it's Stonehill Defender into Cheap Taunt into Sulfurous upgraded hero power, that's a pretty scary amount of damage, and maybe Citizen Napper's out in this game.
They'd have to have the perfect sequence of taunts, though, wouldn't they? Like, really cheap stuff.
Yeah, oh, and a Vulgar Homunculus has actually been played this game.
Oh.
And even if it hadn't, they'd only have, what, 6 damage plus the 8,
Well,
so
exactly.
it would be 14.
Issue.
Yeah. So pretty much perfectly safe here, Argentina, with or without the extra taunt that's been put in the way.
A mistake there. The fact that that Vulgar Homunculus was on the left side of the hand made me think that...
Right, yeah,
from the
yeah.
start.
Yeah, I was falling into the same mistake.
Passes.
Better hope that Australia are better at tracking Joaquin's hand than we are, then.
But some pretty respectable options here on this turn. I'm looking at attacking into the Homunculus. You send your Saronite Chain Gang into the 4/4, and then Acolyte of Pain with a couple of Warpaths is a huge amount of your deck being drawn.
That's very strong, but it does leave Argentina 1 damage off lethal.
Yeah, maybe you want to play some more taunts, actually. They do, however, find the Tri-Whisker armor with both of them left in their deck. They can gain a huge amount of armor on this turn.
Can they still do the clear they wanted to if they gain the armor? Yeah, they can. Yeah, okay.
Lovely play.
Suddenly, things are starting to look that little bit better for Citizen Napper. And for Team Australia, if they can win this game, it might alter the fate of this series. Mossy Horror here is looking nuts.
Yeah, that's a pretty big if on this turn.
Yeah.
With the Hellfire going to be coming in every single turn, the quest still isn't even completed so far into the game. Only 6 cards left in deck.
That's really weird. But it's because Australia have been on the defensive this whole game.
Absolutely.
Which is, again, really ironic. They've been on the defensive, so haven't been able to play their taunts. Because they've had to play all of the removal. Both Broads gone, both Executes gone straight away, Shield Slam, Warpath. All of these tools have been used up bit by bit. As it looks like Joaquin is trying to work out whether he wants to go Mossy Horror, maybe develop Twilight Drake, or whether he wants to play the Hellfire and push 6 damage to the face this turn.
Yeah.
With so much removal, which looks like it specifically targets the Taunt Warrior. They had a Black Knight, they've got this Mossy Horror, they've used the Spellbreaker, they've got another Spellbreaker. Taunts just aren't really doing anything for Australia.
Yeah, and I think actually the more I look at this turn, the more I like saving back the Mossy Horror, because like you mentioned, that would be a fine play on this turn. Removes a couple of minions from the board, denies them a card draw. But is it that good? You're developing 2 attack for 6 mana, which means you could only go Sun Fury hero power to maximize your attack. So it would be, what, half as much damage presented on board here as with this play. And also the upside of Mossy Horror in destroying Cornered Sentries, Stonehill Defenders, which you have not seen yet, is so high. That is such a strong play.
Yep, definitely can't argue with that one, Derek. It just makes so much sense to hold on to it. And now Citizen Napper, Team Australia scrambling for something to do this turn. Again, double Cornered Sentry hero power looks pretty strong, but if they could see what we can see, and they know the deck list, they know that the chances of being there are quite high.
I mean, what they were really hoping for there was just the second Tri-Whisk, because they could go 1 Cornered Sentry, 2 Cornered Sentry, whatever, gain a whole bunch of armor, because they need that armor to stabilize this game. They do not have a chance if they don't gain health. Obviously throwing down the Tar Creepers here makes a very good amount of sense to me to play around that Mossy Horror with the attack buff that they get on their opponent's turn. A very nice way to play around a card that they will know is in their opponent's hand, or sorry, not in their opponent's hand, in their opponent's deck, due to the open deck list format.
So, 3 damage off lethal with just Hellfire hero power. That's looking like a guaranteed 2-turn lethal as well, although may as well save the Hellfire for the finisher. So this turn, just Lich King hero power?
Yeah, sorry, I was just trying to count up some kind of lethal on this turn, and they're, what, 2 damage off lethal? With the Hellfire, Silence, hero power?
Yeah.
Which is not a bad play to make, because you're not putting too many minions on the board, forces your opponent to have that Dry Whisker.
So many.
But having said that,
decisions.
you could also just play the Lich King, and you can make a similar play on one of the following turns. You still got Hellfire Spellbreaker to break through these tools.
They just don't lose this way, do they? Since the Nappas use both shield blocks, they've used Garrosh, they don't have their hero power anymore. How do they actually gain health now? This is just a guaranteed setup for 2-turn lethal with the Hellfire hero power next turn.
Death Grip also not even that bad. I mean, it's obviously not the best card because here you're looking for something like Death and Decay, maybe the weapon. Death Coil would be fantastic as well here just to get that extra bit of damage in, but getting them one tick closer to fatigue is not to be sniffed at, assuming there's even a minion left in the deck at this point.
It just doesn't matter though, does it? It's just lethal with the hero power and the Hellfire next turn.
Yep.
As sits the Nappa, doesn't have any way to gain armor. Well, they've only used one Dry Wisp.
Yeah,
I think
so
that's their last.
That's their out. That's their out. They go Acolyte
Like
Pain,
hero power.
yeah. Or maybe from where they're sitting, their out is they don't have Hellfire.
Yep. I think that makes a lot of sense. And that makes a lot of sense to Australia, as that's what they go for. They clear up the Twilight Drake, but that's just not going to win them the game, is it?
Yeah, Twilight Drake being an absolute bro in that scenario for the Lich King, taking a hit, as good bros should.
Lifesteal just a little bit too slow there. As that is going to do it. As the rope burns out, Joaquin realizes this is lethal. Gonna play the Death Grip because why not, I guess. Doesn't steal any. Oh no, it does. It steals the Phantom Militia. Hero power, Hellfire ends the game. Argentina are going 2-0 against Australia. They have a favored matchup coming up. Both of their teams are fighting to keep their place in this tournament, and right now it's looking very good for Argentina.
It's looking absolutely fantastic, and I have to say, I'm quite glad to see them going up 2-0 in this series, because after going 0-2 in games so far in the global games, I found myself very surprised because I was half tempted to pick Argentina for one of my teams.
Really?
After seeing at the Summer Championships, Nalgadan coming so close to getting that spot at the World Championships, becoming the first South American player to get to that point at the World Championships. And he played so fantastically there. I just loved what I saw from him. Great attitude as well. I would love to have seen him go all the way. And even though he didn't get there at Summer Champs, he could have done a little bit better with his very strong teammate PNC here at the Global Games. But sadly, so far it hasn't been going their way in terms of the previous 2 weeks, but here in with a very strong chance of staying in.
Yep, well, you guys know the drill by now. We're going to give the players a chance to reset after the first 2 games. Most importantly, give Australia. I've written down Austria in my notes. That's why I need to add some letters here. They've given us Australia a chance to reset. We're going to be back in just a few moments with the rest of this series. That song is frustratingly catchy.
It's one of the better ones, I think.
It's great, but it's all I can hear every day now. But ever since we've started showing that video in the break, I just go into my break like...
I mean...
It doesn't stop.
League of Explorers is still stuck in my head after all these years. That one was truly a curse upon me.
Amazing. Anyway, speaking of amazing, Argentina's performance so far, they won an unfavorable, then they won a favorable, now they have another favorable, and if they can win that, that's a 3-0 sweep, keeping them in the tournament whilst knocking Australia out.
That's right. They are in with a pretty reasonable matchup, I would say, here with, as you see here, from Nalgadan, not Treads Red. A very nice matchup. Any kind of aggro deck against the Egg Hunter usually is going to be in a very good spot. However, as I was talking about in the break, how I feel about any Hunter deck with Rexar against aggro decks, you always have to reevaluate what can happen, because this is not a super board-focused deck. It doesn't take much to beat the aggro mage off the in board control early on. Just one egg, one Keleseth, although they're playing Loot Hoarders here, can do huge amounts of work to pull things back in their favor. It really just takes play against burn damage.
Just look how good Australia's curve is, though. We haven't even seen what they've mulliganed into, but the fact they've got... Oh, no, we had. Sorry, we saw that mulligan already. We got 2 into 3 into Terra Scale plus Play Dead. And the issue for Nalgadan is that Explosive Runes loses to the Egg. Yeah. Cinderstorm, Arcane Missiles lose to the Egg. And hey, it's the new board.
Oh, wow, it is. That's very cool.
Pog Champ.
I wonder what the secrets will be.
Will there be an erupting volcano? Probably not.
I doubt it. That would be quite a secret.
But yeah, the lack of any Mana Worm in Argentina's opening hand, maybe they consider coining out these 2-drop. Sorcerer's Apprentice is difficult for Hunters to kill, actually, on turn 1, turn 2. They're going to go the Arcanologist, the more sensible play, I guess, curving into Sorcerer's Apprentice and then Curator plus Secret. This is the way that this deck can win without Mana Worm. However, the secret they got is Explosive Runes, which again, loses pretty hard to the Egg.
Yeah, it's not great, but even then, you know, killing off the Egg with a secret, it's obviously bad because your opponent's played a 3-mana 5/5 and your secret does nothing. But as a small glimmer of hope here for Argentina, it does mean that the Play Dead and the Terrascale Stalker do not have an effect that they can activate on. And even then, Naguadan will be pretty decisively ahead on board. Because even with Frosty picking up the Candle Shot here, so what? They don't have the mana to play it next turn if they want to go for the Devilsaur Egg.
Yeah, Naguadan's going to sort of be ahead on board there, but the fact that Frosty could end up with 2 5/5s the following turn is going to be a bit of an issue. But hey, you said this match was all about burn damage. That's all the aggro mage really cares about. And they are going to be able to put in quite a bit of chip damage over the next couple turns. So maybe this will be enough to start to get this job done. With a Luneth to back up and Frostbolts, Fireballs and Pyroblasts in the deck, then that's a lot of damage over the next 4 or 5 turns.
So you were saying a little bit earlier on about how powerful Devilsaur Egg can be when played into an Explosive Runes. Does that mean in this situation then that you would simply not play it on this board because you want to play it into an Explosive Runes?
In my opinion, no. I think the follow-up of Terrascale Stalker plus Play Dead is so powerful. Even if it's Counterspell, it doesn't matter. They still get a 3/3 and a 5/5. If it's Runes, they still get 2 5/5s. It's just too good with the hand that Australia have now.
I agree. I like the consideration from them, not just the insta-slam egg. Because Terrascale Stalker there was not bad. You draw a card, you get a 3/3 on board, which is a fantastic stat line against the minions currently represented by the Mage. But as you said, a 3-mana 3/3 that also gets you a 5/5 is bustedly powerful. They will just never lose board control after the next turn.
So, the real question now is, does Naguadan play around it by destroying the egg? It's not something that Aggro Mage really wants to do. They want to be pushing, if they've got the damage to spare, they want to be pushing it all to the face. What they'd have to do to destroy this egg is trade both minions in, as they're obviously going to go with the Curator Mage play. So yeah, they're going to just deal with the Loot Hoarder and ignore it and accept their punishment as a second Play Dead gets drawn.
However, it is worth pointing out now, Frosty does not have the liberty to just go completely egg crazy. They do not live in, you know, crazy super value egg Gaga land.
They sort of can, right? Or like they could at least go Grievous Bite, Candle Shot, Play Dead, and that deals with 2 out of 3 minions on the board and summons 1.
Right, yeah, but that's not the highest value play they can make in the immediate. They do not necessarily have the liberty to go stalk it into Play Dead here, because they would then take a huge chunk of damage. They probably get met with either the Play Dead being counterspelled, which is a big tempo loss, or the Terrascale Stalker being blown up by Explosive Runes. So a lot can go wrong here.
There's the middle option too, which is Candle Shot on both Play Deads. Candle Shot just to deal with the Imani Berserker. However, I was going to say the Grievous Bite Play Dead play is very tempting with Candle Shot, but look at this, they're considering going with the Terrascale anyway. No, change the mind, okay. Find out which secret it is. It's actually the runes.
Yeah, I think any play on this turn that involves Candle Shot is a play that I like, because taking that damage off the board is so important. They've realized board control is decisively theirs now. They will not lose it for the rest of the game, so all they really need to worry about is damage through to face. Terrascale Stalker into Play Dead was, I think, way too risky there. I think in that scenario, you could have probably gotten away with Terrascale Stalker into the Candle Shot.
Just the Candle Shot on the Imani.
Yes. You obviously...
I wonder.
Okay, so if it was Explosive Runes, then you're still ahead on board. You have taken 3 damage and lost your 3/3. And also, you've kind of lost the effect of being able to play Cube into a Explosive Runes, which is pretty good, because if you play Cube onto the 5/5, you eat up the runes and just get an extra 5/5 out of it.
But this is one of the problems with the matchup, and I know I keep coming back to it, and I know I kept coming back to it with Raven last week as well. But those Cinderstorms, look how dead they are now in this hand. They run the risk of proccing the egg. That would be a disaster. They run the risk of just hitting minions and not going face at all. The time has passed to play that card, and they are just sitting there dead.
That really was such a complex turn for Australia, because looking at it again, on the last turn, if it had been counterspelled and they'd had their play dead counterspelled, they would only have an egg on the board, which means they're going to be taking that 2 damage from the Arcanologist pretty consistently in that scenario.
All right, so Argentina were able to at least deal with the egg. So no more play deads, no more Terra Scales. But is this too little too late? Maybe they should have dealt with the egg the turn before when they had the chance to. That would have prevented all of this from happening.
That's true. It would, however, have left a 5/5 on the board, so they would probably have just lost board control anyway, at which point just playing a Terra Scale Stalker from their opponent is probably good enough.
Again, explosive runes, weak to all of these death rattles. Australia just basically played a faceless manipulator and destroyed their secret.
Right, yeah. But the important thing here for Argentina is, while they have not won the board, which, you know, they were never really going to do against Egg, Terra Scale Stalker, Play Dead, Candle Shot, all that nonsense, they're not in that bad of a position, and they have a Luneth on the follow-up.
Yeah, that's their only hope here. The positive for Nagodan is that the Hunter doesn't really have that much burst damage. They're not going to be doing crazy double kill command things. However, there are 2 5/5s on the board. That in itself is a lot of damage.
Yeah.
In the next 2 or 3 turns.
I think this is just too much pressure coming in from the Hunter now. They have done too good of a job clearing up the early boards. And now if you spend a turn playing a Luneth, it's not lethal on board, but it's kind of an unsalvageable position.
Job's done.
Nagodan doesn't have the time to play this Luneth really, but what else has he got? As Singapore take their first win, they are back in the series against Brazil, and I think Australia will be following their footsteps very shortly.
Certainly looks that way. 15, 1 damage off lethal on the following turn.
You win.
Oh, there we go. Argentina gives it up. Australia take their first win of the series. Okay, that's 1 foot in the door. And as we've said, it looked like it was going to be a 3-0. That's not happened now. But as we move forward into the next matchup, it's going to be Taunt Warrior for Argentina versus Cube Warlock for Australia. A good old matchup.
That is a bit of an old school one that we see there, and not all too much has changed, I would say, as compared to pre-nerf Cube Lock to the current one. Obviously, your starts are going to be a little bit less aggressive usually, because you don't have that devastatingly powerful 5-mana lackey anymore, only the 6-mana possibility. But in general, the main thing that you're worried about in this matchup as the Taunt Warrior, in my opinion, isn't the explosive Doomguard starts that you often see against other control decks like Druid. It's Gul'dan primarily, and it's also just Void Lords. I think whenever I'm playing Cube Lock against the Taunt Warrior, I find that just the Death Rattle, the inability for Warrior to get them off the board, means you can so consistently get enough damage through to face to just close out the game, or even make it so they never get any Ragnaros fireballs through to face.
I've got to say it as well. It's that Cube again.
Right.
The Cube causes endless issues. Warrior, like with the Void Lord, is just not able to deal with the Death Rattle consistently. Brawl is rendered useless when winning the Brawl means that 2 Doom Guards get spat out, or 2 Void Lords, or whatever else. It's just devastating. It's control deck versus Carnivorous Cube.
Yeah. And as just so often seems to be happening in global games, as we've been talking about with Taunt Warrior kind of feeling like the bottom deck, or the bottom class at the moment with Warrior, I should say. It's just not hitting those matchups that it wants to. It's such a deck that's in such a weird spot, because against Odd Paladin or Token Druid, it's nigh on impossible to lose. It's such a favourable matchup against those 2 decks. But against so many other decks, it's just so miserable, because you do not have the ability to keep up with the powerful late games that some of the other decks are throwing down. The power of Shudderwock is too powerful. The power of Malagos or Hadronox or Master Oakheart is too powerful for the Warrior to really deal with, because while 2 mana for 8 damage to a random target is good, late games in Hearthstone have got so incredibly powerful recently that it can't keep up.
Unless you throw an Azalina in, and then it does just beat the Shuttlewalk Shaman.
Right, yeah, that is obviously a new change with the patch that just went live earlier today. I don't believe either team has put an Azalina.
They haven't, but they did have the option to. I want to make this explicitly clear. The teams were warned before they submitted this week. You know, the patch will be live.
Yep.
These are the games that it should affect. If you would like to tech for it, feel free. The teams both decided, maybe it's a gentleman's agreement, decided not to go for that, but the option was there. So there is a world where we did see that tonight.
That's true, and Azalina, even before the patch went live, and for those of you who are unaware, the change now is that Azalina, when it copies cards from your opponent's hand, it copies their current mana cost, not their default mana cost. So the main change there is if your opponent has a 1 mana Shudderwock in hand, you can play a 1 mana Shudderwock, which enables the most insane possibilities. You've probably seen it on Twitter at this point, and it basically, the upshot of it is that as Taunt Warrior with Azalina, you can pretty consistently beat Shudderwock now.
I mean, the most important thing to remember is when you play the 1 mana Shudderwock, Azalina goes off again, which means you get another 1 mana Shudderwock, and then you play that, and then the cycle repeats itself. And with all of the armor gain battle cries that Warrior has, or just shove in a Life Drinker and a Primordial Drake, you can basically guarantee the win in a couple turns, well, depending on which combo you go for.
That's right. And as I was saying, even before the patch went live, Azalina was a card that occasionally saw play in Taunt Warrior. One instance that I remember was Race, who's obviously playing right now in the off-stream match for Brazil in his run at the Summer Championships recently, decided to just straight up replace Scourgelord Garrosh with Azalina, trying to give him a little bit more possibility against the late game decks, I suppose.
Well, it's always made a little bit of sense in Taunt Warrior, because the sort of issue when you get to the end of the game with the Taunt Warrior, once you've used the Sulfurous, is that you sort of run out of stuff. When the removal's all gone, you tend to end up with 2 or 3 cards in the hand, but if you're against a control deck, you've got this amazing hero power, and you just take your opponent's hand, suddenly you've got an advantage, because you're playing with the same cards, but you have this hero power that just wins the game.
To an extent, I agree with you, but against a lot of decks, I don't think that actually becomes comes to actuality, because against a Warlock, for example, an even Warlock, if you copy their hand full of minions or something, and you're just throwing them down onto the board, in that scenario, their Gul'dan hero power can target your face every single time.
That's true.
And if you don't have a whole bunch of removal to clear their guys off, and you're just trading minion for minion, you probably lose, because you will just be beaten down by that hero power. And I think in the ideal world where you can save your removal until the later stages of the game, any kind of removal card is the best card you can have in your deck once you have the Die Insect hero power.
Yeah, that's fair. I will say the one Azalina tech choice that I never did understand was putting it in there in order to try and beat Rin.
Oh, yeah.
Because you just end up with the same, like, you both blow up your decks, but your opponent blew up your deck first, so you're still losing.
Got to be honest, I never actually bothered learning that interaction because everyone was just telling me it's dumb.
Yeah, but it saw play. It saw play in playoffs even, I believe, and it didn't make any sense to me, or I think Lorinda and I talked about that a lot, and nope, no sense at all. However, we did see Azalina in Taunt Warrior do some serious work against China's Odd Warrior, where it did work. The Taunt Warrior just... Or was it may have been the other way around. It was the other way around, wasn't it? It was the Odd Warrior played the Azalina to copy the Taunt Warrior's hand, I think, or something like that.
No, it was in the Odd Warrior's hand, but I believe it didn't get played for the entire game. The Azalina.
Oh, sorry, I'm thinking the previous week, because you know the highlight where they both ended up with the same, like Black Knights, playing around Black Knights, etc.
My mistake, sorry. I thought you meant the China versus Poland game we saw this week.
I was talking about China versus USA, so it's clear how we came to that miscommunication. But yeah, so it can do some stuff in those matchups. As again, we're just waiting. The players are taking a little bit longer than usual to get ready. We don't like just sitting here talking to you about Azalina. Well, we kind of do. We do like talking about Hearthstone, but we know we would all rather be watching some gameplay right now.
We would indeed. But with this upcoming match, it's going to be relatively similar, but obviously flipped to what we saw earlier on with the even lock, up against the Taunt Warrior. But I just find it's going to be even more of a miserable matchup because you still have that check, as I mentioned earlier on, where when they play the Mountain Giant on turn 4, you have to have an answer. But then after that, it does not relent in the slightest.
Speaking of unrelenting, the Carnivorous Cube is there in hand. Possessed Lackey, though this mulligan's a little bit on the awkward side, as Akumaker doesn't have anything to do over the first few turns. PNC there for Argentina, though. Considering... I don't really think there's that much to consider. I think that's just a full mull for the Warrior.
Actually, taking a look at Argentina's deck list, there's a very interesting tech here in double Iron Beak Owl in their Taunt Warrior, which could absolutely have some interesting implications here, because in a deck that does not run Silence, Cube Warlock can just be the most insanely greedy deck you've ever seen in their life. They just play Cube onto a Doom Guard and don't bother Dark Pacting it, because what are they going to do? Kill it? They just get the Doom Guards out of it again. And then if they don't kill it off, you can go for Prince Taldaram, all that kind of nonsense in a truly disgusting fashion. But now that the Owls are there for Argentina, it does mean that Australia kind of have to be kept on their toes now.
Argentina did opt to keep the Dry Whisker Armorer there as well. I was a little bit surprised by that. Do they just want to play it on curve? It's very good against...
Wait, really? They kept the armor?
Yeah, it's very good against a board full of Void Lords and Voidwalkers later. Unless they mulled it and got the exact same card in the same position, but it was there originally as well.
Well, if they did, as you pointed out, I do obviously find that quite surprising, because while we've been talking about what Australia on the Q block can do, for Argentina, they are just going to want to be turboing through that quest as quick as they possibly can, just to try and assemble some kind of a surprise lethal, or at the very least hold on to their removal cards to the point where when they have completed the quest, hopefully very early on, they still have enough removal cards to get that damage through to face.
Right. As PNC, you can see the communication going on with Argentina. You can see just how important this series is to them. Staying in the Hearthstone Global Games, if they win this, they've still got a good shot of getting through to the next phase. They just need to keep winning from now. It's like, okay, it's hard,
so
it's doable.
Your advice to Argentina is basically just win, idiots.
Just keep winning, Argentina. You did a good job at the start of the series. The Doomsayer does a pretty good job at putting a halt to the Acolyte of Pain there. I did expect the Stonehill Defender to come down on turn 3, actually.
Yeah, it was a very interesting choice there that they had to make, because obviously if they're met with Doomsayer, they're fairly sad. They do have the backup option of still just drawing one card. So even in the worst case scenario, they're getting a card off the Acolyte of Pain. And the potential upside of your opponent not playing Doomsayer here, which they're obviously not going to keep off the mulligan, is absolutely massive. Because then you get an Acolyte to stick on the board, you're probably going to end up drawing 3 cards off of it. It would have been devastatingly powerful for Argentina, but there was, of course, the punish for that play in the Doomsayer.
They're able to now swing in the weapon and execute this Mountain Giant, whilst also developing the Stonehill Defender this turn. So things looking okay for the time being for PNC. And there's that first Iron Beak Owl you were just talking about. There's nothing it's going to be hitting in the immediate future unless Akumaker decides to coin out a Lackey.
Right.
In which case, I guess Lackey's as good a target as any to use it on and just slow down the deck.
It's a decent target. It's not a particularly optimistic target to hit, because you would obviously rather hit a cube primarily. Obviously, the main thing that you're afraid of traditionally in cube block of being silenced is your Void Lords. Probably won't come into realization here for PNC, because he won't have that threatening of a board, I would imagine, throughout the course of this game. But I think what's really interesting about the Owl in this matchup is I don't actually think it will end up being that good when it's actually played. I think the main way it will be powerful is just that it's there. The fact that Akumaker has to be afraid of it is what will make them play weird, and that's the benefit. Like, Argentina would be probably fairly happy to have it as the bottom couple cards in their deck, just so that their opponent cannot go greedy cube Taldaram plays.
Yeah, it's going to have to be cube and then immediate Dark Packs in order to take advantage and play around that Iron Beak Owl, which is something that the Warlock is capable of doing, as we do see the first Lackey gets coined out. So it's going to be decision time for PNC now. Is this a target worthwhile enough to use up this Owl? Would they rather silence whatever comes out of the Lackey if it's a Void Lord? Would they rather wait and silence a cube as Singapore tie up the off-stream series? It's 2-2 between Brazil and Singapore to decide which team goes 3-0 in the HGG Swiss.
That's going to be a real nail-biter. And for Singapore, imagine just coming out of nowhere, being, I would imagine, very few people's prediction to do so well, and going 3-0 right at the start, giving themselves such a strong chance of qualifying through with those 4 victories needed in the Swiss portion.
Singapore did pretty well last year, though. I remember being wowed by Sequinox again and again and again. The first time we ever saw Horror Priest.
That was very cool.
There's a lot of discussion going on with Argentina there.
And rightly so, it's a complex couple of turns. If they go for the silence here, obviously nothing can be pulled out, is just the strong default play. It was worth mentioning, with the current amount of attack on board, the Possessed Lackey could not kill itself off on that turn unless something extra came down, which is a very real consideration. Because if the Lackey could just kill itself off, a Doomguard comes out, you're afraid of Cube into Pact. Or even if a Void Lord comes off, you're very afraid of Cube Pact on the following turn. But I think here going for the Owl and praying that your opponent does not have the second one is a very strong play.
Praise that were not answered, though, as next turn Australia are going to have a lot of ways to proc this Lackey if PNC does not do it for them. They've got Hellfire, they've got a Lord Godfrey even, although that would be a little bit of a waste of one of the most powerful resources in the deck. They've got the Cube, though cubing a Possessed Lackey, probably not going to feel that great.
Yeah, that's not really what you want to be going for in this matchup. Just getting any demons in the Blood Reaver cooldown pool is fantastic here. I was talking about how good Void Lords are, I find, in this matchup. But that is compared to how bad they are usually in control matchups. Usually you just want those Doom Guards attacking to face, resurrected with cooldown after you've made 5 or 6 of them with cubes and all that nonsense.
Well, they got the Doomguard out and don't have a way of dealing with it this... Oh yeah, they do. Whisker into Shield Slam, I bet.
Very nice way of dealing with it.
Very flashy.
Yeah. And maybe this is one of the reasons why they, if they did keep Dry Whisker Armor, as you pointed out, it's not bad. It gives them an answer if they pick up Shield Slam to Giant, to Doomguard. As they're now not actually in that bad of a position. What does Akumaker actually have here to fight back onto the board? They don't have the meat that Cube wants to eat to actually get those powerful plays rolling until Blood Reaver Gul'dan knocks about.
So if they just wanted to get the board back this turn, then Godfrey alone would have done the trick. They are going to cube the Lackey, look at that. Just yank out the other Doomguard from the deck and any Void Lords that are lurking around.
I mean, when you got no demons drawn at all so far, you can absolutely see the reasoning why.
It's not greedy in the slightest. I mean, you look at the fact there's a Faceless Manipulator there as well. You'd think that they'd want to make a cube worth Facelessing, but this cube is not worth that at all. However, the Lackeys that come out of the cube, the Doomguards that come out of the Lackey may be worth Facelessing, but that seems like it's a long way away. This cube has to die, then the Lackey has to die, then the powerful things happen.
But what was their alternative? They have no demons in hand, they have no mountain giants in hand. The cube and the Faceless were doing absolutely nothing at the moment. And I definitely agree with you. If they could, they would much rather cube a Doomguard or a Void Lord. But this is just the best of a bad situation for the Warlock here.
That's the third quest proc out of the 7 for PNC there with the Direhorn Hatchling.
So now with an attack into the Direhorn Hatchling or either of the 2 minions here, and then Lord Godfrey, as they are going for here, they can activate both of their Possessed Lackeys, getting 2 demons thrown out onto the board. A very, very impressive power swing.
One is the Doomguard as well, so that's 5 damage straight to the face. All of this damage is needed, given that Argentina still have 46 health, even after that Doomguard attack. However, you were saying before this game started that Void Lords can just win this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, what answer do they have to deal with all of this? Even if it gets killed off by a Brawl, there's still 3 damage coming in every turn. After you play Gul'dan, they just do not have the answers to deal with that. And that 3 repetitive damage can be so powerful.
Australia's health have gotten a little bit low, but it just doesn't matter with double Spellstone in hand, both of which were just upgraded the once. They've got Gul'dan, that will start healing them up, and most importantly, Argentina don't actually have a means of dealing any damage to the face.
Yeah. And even more, most importantly, Blood Reaver Gul'dan is in hand, just ready to come down, which is so perfect in this matchup. You just want it as quick as possible, get those hero powers in every single turn, because while PNC is at a tremendously high health total, his armor gain is pretty limited from here on in. Especially once the quest does in fact get completed.
What now?
What are PNC's options here? Triple Phantom Militia is sort of my obvious go-to play right now, but nothing is looking good.
Yeah, what happens if you go Triple Phantom Militia, your whole board gets value traded. They're probably going to play a Faceless or a Cube or a Mountain Giant or a Void Lord from hand. It just does not win you the game.
Sure. Potentially Brawl does, if one of these Tower Knights survives. We saw it earlier on.
Ooh, very close indeed, but far from the worst outcome here. It does mean the Faceless Manipulator cannot hit a Void Lord or a Doom Guard to get the damage pummeling through to the face.
For now, but next turn after the Gul'dan gets played, then things are going to take a turn for the worse.
Good point.
For Argentina. As these aren't the best options ever, but Homunculus is probably as good as it gets.
Yeah, getting down to a pretty low health total. But even then, you've got Gul'dan in hand, you have double Amethyst Spellstone, which would both be upgraded
Exactly.
to the full 7 health swing.
And that, I think, is what makes the Homunculus so worth it.
Yeah. Obviously afraid of, in this scenario, a second Brawl. But I would say more importantly, 5 Warpaths, or even just 4 Warpaths, would clear up the whole board here for Argentina.
Yeah, I mean, if the Brawl happens, they don't really care too much. They just follow it with Gul'dan and then say Brawl best, and they can.
Or I suppose I should say for Australia, they're not afraid of Brawl.
Yeah.
It will just be in the back of their mind at this point.
No Rins to be found from the Stonehill defenders, and I have to imagine that's what they're looking for, or what they were looking for.
It's a good point.
But it shouldn't matter too much, as PNC's health total is starting to drop. We were on 40, or like 51 or something earlier, now it's 39.
Yeah.
But Gyroskar Armorer is just 12 more armor this turn if they want it. However, they probably want to finish the quest. That's 5. 6. And 7 another 7.
And it is obviously important to get that quest completed as quickly as possible, as I pointed out. And turn 10 is a pretty quick quest completion. You cannot be too upset about that. But with all these Void Walkers knocking about, that's just too annoying for PNC to deal with at the moment.
Wow, double Spellstone. PNC's going to return to his PC in a few seconds. See that this health total situation has changed quite dramatically. Akumaker saying, okay, sure, you've got your Sulfuras. Good luck dealing 25 damage to my face over the next few turns.
I would love it there if PNC just does a full spitting of all his water onto the camera.
Drawing the Brawl, though, may also encourage the full water spit, as Brawl Sulfuras hero power is a good way to start getting back into this game if Australia don't have Gul'dan.
Yeah, I mean, that's your out here, isn't it? It's if they don't have Gul'dan. Because if you go Brawl, Sulfuras goes face, and they don't have Gul'dan, they're only going to be making small plays onto the board. They're going to be playing something like a Void Lord for the best card, maybe a Mountain Giant. It's all pretty uninspired plays. Or unimpressive, I should say.
Yeah.
I wonder.
It's a shame Argentina don't have Warpath. You mentioned earlier that it would take 4 procs of the Warpath to clear the board, and then Brawl could be saved for after Gul'dan.
Yeah.
But in this situation, it's going to have to be Brawl this turn. I guess they're thinking about, I guess I was going to say, I guess they're considering playing the Gyroskar Armorer while there are 7 queens on the board. They go for something quite different. They are going to try and hold back on that Brawl.
So I think they're trying to, in this instance, capitalize on the one advantage of this board in that it is actually just not very powerful. There's not all too much damage coming through. And save that Brawl for the Gul'dan, because with only 9 cards left, even if they don't have it now, before the game is over, Blood Reaver Gul'dan almost definitely will be drawn. As we can see, obviously, it already has been drawn.
Is it possible for the Warrior to fatigue the Warlock here? It's not looking likely at all, but I'm looking at the different deck totals. No, the warrior just doesn't live that long.
You just don't survive. Like, Q-Block hasn't even used some of their most powerful cards. They've still got the Cube, they've got the Pact, they've still got a Void Lord knocking about in the deck, and obviously, they've still got Blood Reaver Gul'dan.
Wow, going full Lord Godfrey here. And why not? It's just an impossible board to deal with. Brawl does next to nothing now.
Yeah, your opponent has clearly demonstrated that even if they do have the capacity to clear off this board, they are unwilling to do so. And again, they're just wanting to get that Blood Reaver Gul'dan for a full suite of minions, because I think they've correctly realized here what their one potential weakness in this matchup from here on in is, which is that they won't be able to summon enough minions. That Die Insect Hero Power will be connecting face far too frequently if they don't get a full value from this Blood Reaver Gul'dan.
Yep. Double Dark Pact in hand though. For Akumake if they want to heal even more. Doesn't quite heal 8 apiece like it used to.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a strong card.
It's so weird though, because even as 1-mana destroy a minion heal 8, it wasn't a good card. Like, everyone in their reviews, like even when I saw that card, I just thought it was complete trash. It's just not a good card, but it's so broken.
Did anyone actually rate Cube highly though? I don't remember.
I think some people were saying it could be very powerful. Like, it's such a unique card, it has to be powerful in some way. I don't think anyone thought it would be as devastatingly powerful as it has turned out to be, and will continue to be.
I mean, I totally missed it. I just thought it was another Moat Lurker. Moat Lurker 2. Moat Lurker was no good, so...
It's not that bad. It's a 5-mana 4/6 instead of a 6-mana 3/5.
Well, yeah, obviously that one's better. But it can't target opponent minions.
Sure.
Void Lord number 2.
Yeah, I think you can just quite happily throw that down on this board.
Yeah.
Or even then, you don't have to. Like, you're in a position where you're so far ahead on board, you can push forward 15 damage to the face on this turn. That demands an answer from your opponent. If they do have a brawl, you still have 2 4/4s knocking about. At minimum.
It's just being very carefully maneuvered by Australia. The fact that they are holding back Gul'dan means that PNC is having to hold back his brawl, and in the meantime, it's Akumake dealing the damage, not PNC.
That's right. And it's just lovely to play here from Akumake. I think they're realizing what their advantage is. They don't have to rush out a Gul'dan because they're killing their opponent anyway. Save it for the board. Their one weakness is maybe they run out of minions. And with this, keeping back a Blood Reaver Gul'dan, they will not run out of minions.
Oh, so let's see. With the Warpath drawn, Argentina could play that 5 times, clearing everything except the Void Lord. Obviously, the Cube spits out 2 4/4s, which...
means you die.
It does just mean they die, so that's not really an option. Hero powering and hitting one of the 4/4s or 4/3s could be a way to go, I guess, following up with some taunts. It's a real stretch, though.
Yeah, something like Brawl double Warpath doesn't really even keep you alive. It has to be something like Dry Whisker into Brawl, hope your Dry Whisker survives. And then you can clear the board with Warpath on the following turn, and Gul'dan is the bottom card. That's really the kind of situation they're in at this point.
With this and this and this and this and this and this and this, then maybe we can win.
It's a lot of ifs, which usually is not a good game plan in Hearthstone.
If we don't get that horrible matchup, maybe we'll win the series.
And now this begs a very interesting question from Argentina when they are clearly so reluctant to use this brawl. You have to ask the question, what are they saving it for? As Australia do manage to close out the game, which I would have to imagine is obviously a Gul'dan. They want to have the possibility to clear up afterwards.
Yeah.
But then I think they need to ask themselves, do they ever actually win after that point when Blood Reaver Gul'dan has been played? So maybe they're for Argentina, coming to the conclusion that just using that brawl and praying that the Gul'dan isn't there was just their best shot of winning that game. I think it might have given them a better chance.
Maybe. It was a horrible matchup through and through. They did a great job in the early game at controlling the board. They tried to utilize Iron Beak Owl, but using it on the Lackey just wasn't enough. They didn't draw the second one to use on a cube.
Yeah.
So that was the game for them as Australia tie up the series. We are going to go to one last break today, but when we come back, it will be Game 5. Argentina's Combo Priest versus Australia's Shadowwalk Shaman. You don't want to miss that. We'll see you soon. Working with Dr. Boom must feel a little bit like working with Lorinda, actually. Mad
How so?
scientist, crazy opinions about things.
You'll probably blow up at one point.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, we are 2-2, Argentina versus Australia. Australia have begun their reverse sweep. They've evened out the game. Can they take it all the way, though? That is the question. As next up, we have Combo Priest for Argentina versus Shadowwalk Shaman for Australia. Derek, this is not a matchup I've seen much of. In fact, Combo Priest is not a deck I've seen much of recently.
That's right. It's very much been eclipsed by the more common Mind Blast Control Priest, because it obviously has a very nice matchup up against the aggressive decks, which we've been seeing more and more of in the global games. But it also has a decent chance against the control decks, whereas on the Combo Priest, it can have some very, very favourable matchups against the likes of Druid and, you know, to an extent, the Shadowwalk Shaman as well. But it can have some pretty dire matchups as well.
Curiously, this isn't the unpowered Steambot version of the deck that we've seen a lot of recently. It's actually the version that runs Lyra, the Elixirs, it runs Ysera. So it's got a big, beefy late game, potentially. However, that's not what beats Shadowwalk, is it? Shadowwalk loses to just a very quick Divine Spirit, Inner Fire, you're dead now.
Right, it's the fact that very similarly to the Control Paladins of yore, Shadowwalk Shaman cannot consistently clear off minions every single turn. They rely on their opponent building up a board, having to overextend, and then they go Volcano, they go Lightning Storm, they go Hagatha. They have very powerful board sweeps, but their single target removal is rather lacking, outside of, I suppose, Lightning Bolt, and to a greater extent Hex, as we see in the hand there for Australia. Their ability to clear off every single minion is rather low.
Yeah, I mean, they can freeze things temporarily, but that doesn't exactly solve the problem. Some minions can get hexed, some get frozen. That's about it, though. And then the frozen minion just unfreezes and doubles its health and then kills you.
I was taking a look at PNC's hand there. I had to look at the list for a minute just to make sure it wasn't a Control Priest after all, and we'd made a horrible mistake, because it is quite a lot of the same core cards making their way through. It's the version that relies on dragons. You've still got Duskbreaker, Primordial Drake, still got the Twilight Acolyte into Cabal's Shadow Priest combo.
It still just looks... Okay, until the Divine Spirit was picked up, it still just looked like Control Priest, though.
But it's not a particularly devastatingly powerful hand available to Argentina at the moment. It's pretty slow.
Yeah.
As you know, they are not running the version that just hyper draws through the whole deck as quickly as possible with the likes of Wild Pyromancer and Circle of Healing, neither of which are found, as we do see Brazil being one of the very few teams to advance on 3-0 in the Hearthstone global games in terms of series. Whereas Singapore, sadly losing that match, will still be at 2-1, which is a very respectable scoreline.
Yeah, that's still fine. There'll only be one team left to join the Elite. 3-0s, which we will show you later on, but New Zealand versus Taiwan will be competing to join that spot. So we'll have to catch up on that one a little bit later. In the meantime, though, Shadowwalk is doing what Shadowwalk does, drawing through the deck, playing Saronite. Chain Gangs on 4, and then rolling forward to Zola and Grumble. That's not a bad curve for Frosty.
It's a pretty fantastic curve, I would say, with a pretty respectable chance as well. They will actually be able to go Saronite into Grumble, which they then obviously start running into hand size issues because they decided to play the Totem on turn 2. But even then, they can dump the rest of their hand relatively quickly with double Glacial Shard as well.
That's a little discussion point in its own, actually, because usually I would argue it's wrong to play the totems, but sometimes the players have decided to do it. What do you think is the situation here? Why Hero Power on 2?
So they haven't played Cleric on turn 1, so you're not afraid of getting the 1/1 totem, or any totem actually, because they can draw off any totem by attacking in and healing it. And you have the potential to hit, obviously, the Taunt totem to protect your Mana Tide. against some of the plays from PNC, because although this deck has a very powerful win condition if they can get it, it's not all too reactive. You've basically got Duskbreaker as the only real instant removal card against what your opponent is actually trying to throw down. So obviously most of their minion removal will come from minion combat. They just have to play their own powerful minions through the likes of Twilight Drake, and in the earlier stages of the turn, something like Radiant Elemental. And the Taunt Totem does protect very nicely against that to keep your card draw very high indeed.
Something I do enjoy about Argentina's deck is the fact that it runs Lyra, the Sun Shard, which actually has fallen out of fashion a lot recently. Back in the Rosakas Priest days, the card was seen all the time, but now, unfortunately, it doesn't seem to have a consistent place in the meta.
Even then, like, if you think back to the decks that Lyra was actually being played in, it never had a consistent spot. Like, after Lyra was being played in the Rosakas Priests for a while, people started playing Gadget Zan. They realized it just drew through to your combo more consistently. In the OTK combo Priest with Dragon Synergy, the stronger Dragon Synergy with Draconid Operatives and Bookworms, people phased out Lyra for a second Bookworm. It's never had a very core spot in any decks outside of the crazy OTK combo Priest that we see this one in. But I agree, after that long diatribe, I am happy to see it. It's a cool card.
What PNC is unhappy with is the lack of any sort of Duskbreaker in his hand to clear away this board. And as you said, Silent Chain Gang into Grumble is looking like a very strong possibility as long as Australia can get around these hand size issues.
Unless Argentina can do something about this very powerful board, Australia are kind of just looking to run away with the game at the moment. They have Hex to deal with any large minion being made. They've got a whole bunch of Saronite Chain Gangs and Glacial Shards, like crazy amounts at this point to protect them from any big minion attacking in. And it's all the while this Mana Tide is just drawing card after card after card. They're very close to getting the full combo. All they need now is a Shudderwock, and I suppose a Life Drinker as well if they want to actually kill their opponent, which they probably do.
Yeah, it would help. It's a pretty important game. It's probably something that they're aiming at doing.
Yeah.
As it's decision time, Australia are going to have to do something. I'm sure they're discussing the many possibilities this turn. They're ending up with the Hex, just to prevent PNC's Twilight Drake from getting out of control.
Yeah, it's a very... It is a very difficult decision on this turn, as it has been pretty consistently for Australia throughout this series even. Because their Hex is their trump card. It gives them the ability to kill off any large minion being made by Argentina. But I guess their thinking is that Argentina will not just be making a big minion that doesn't win the game. Argentina will be trying to win the game on the spot as soon as they go for a Divine Spirit in a fire combo.
So I said there it is when the Duskbreaker was picked up, and PNC very clearly reacted to it as if he was happy to see it. But is this board actually worth dealing with the Duskbreaker? They throw away their Acolyte of Pain as well. Obviously, Argentina have concluded it is worth it, but there was definitely some discussion to be had there.
Yes, the obvious other real power play that I saw available to them was Coin Cabal Shadow Priest, stealing the copy of Mana Tide Totem to draw them an extra card at the end of the turn. But you pretty quickly can see some problems with that play. They leave themselves open to just having it cleared off on the board. They could be met with a Lightning Storm. Their opponent's board could be bounced back with Grumble. A whole bunch of stuff can go wrong very quickly.
But here we go, power play from Frosty. Okay, Duskbreaker's been played. We develop the Saronite Chain Gang. We freeze the Duskbreaker, prevent the attack, and we prepare to Grumble this board back next turn and create even more Saronites for this board. However, again, that Cabal Shadow Priest you pointed out last turn is still there. That could quite easily take away one of these Saronites.
I wonder.
What other options do Argentina have? Nothing else is looking that great to me.
Yeah, it's just developing a Twilight Drake to get more stats onto the board. But even then, your Cabal Shadow Priest kind of puts more attack onto the board because you're stealing your opponent's minion at the same time. Then the obvious next question to ask is, do they have something they want to steal even more? Like a Twilight Acolyte into Cabal Shadow Priest to steal Grumble. Could be very powerful. But that's a little bit late game thinking.
It's crazy how awkward these Samurai chain gangs are being for the combo, because ideally, Argentina would love to just drop Twilight Drake as a big health minion, Divine Spirit, or Powered Shield, Divine Spirit in a fire, and win the game, but these Saronites are just making that awkward.
Very awkward indeed. As Frosty, now that he's been in a pretty favourable position throughout the whole course of this game, now needs to turn his thoughts towards the later stages of the game. How does he maximise his advantage here to lock out any possibility of his Shudderwock failing? He's already played Zola. That card has now died, so he does not have the possibility to go Zola into Grumble to get a 1-mana Zola to try and repeat or have another do-over on the Shudderwock if it fails the first time.
As if they even draw the Shudderwock.
Yes. And that's why going for this play of bouncing back a Saronite Chain Gang is something I like quite a lot. You could obviously at a later date go for Saronite Chain Gang and Grumble into on turn 10, but then you're only ending up with one more Saronite Chain Gang in hand, and you've just spent a whole turn playing a 7/7 and bouncing taunts back to your hand, which probably means you just die against a combo priest.
It's also worth pointing out the advantage of bouncing back the Glacial Shard to the hand, also pretty major here, preventing this Cabal Shadow Priest from doing anything this turn, preventing another card from potentially winning the game in one turn later on. So I do like the Glacial Shard and Saronite bounce here. And with 3 Saronites having been played way later on when the Shudderwock does come out, it's most likely to work out just fine.
Most likely being the operative word there.
Well, it would have to be both Zola and Grumble before 3 Saronite procs.
Yeah, so 80% I believe to activate it there. I'm almost sure that's wrong, but it's 5 in the morning.
I think it's much higher than that.
Much higher?
Maybe not, actually.
Like 120% chance to work?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go with that.
Sounds right.
As now Argentina finally making a very, very powerful play onto the board on this turn, which is the downside of Frosty's play. When you play Grumble on the immediate, it's a pretty large tempo loss, which you have to regain on the following turn with your 1-mana cards that you've just gained from the Battle Cry. But with all this health throwdown onto the board by PNC, it means it mitigates quite drastically the effectiveness of a potential Volcano that Australia would very possibly be looking to throw down.
Australia are going to have to dig through their deck for something useful to play. Pyromancer's not bad, with Lightning Storm available also.
I don't know if it's quite enough in this scenario, because you can only combo 1 spell with it in the immediate.
Yes, however, they can also play Saronite and Glacial Shard all in the same turn.
It's true.
Or they could go for a Totem and try and get spell damage, although that's a lot riskier. So looks like they are going to go with this Pyromancer.
Yeah. And, you know, I stand by my point. It's not that good, but what else do you actually do on this turn? They need to start fighting back on this board. And as
they got
correctly
3.
pointed out.
They got 3 on the Twilight Acolyte, which means the Grumble can trade into it, removing the biggest threat, freeze the Twilight Drake. I don't know, Derek, this is looking great to me. And again, rolling 3 on the Twilight Acolyte was an important part of that. Yeah. But still, it's worked out nicely.
However, it's still worth pointing out, as you did a little bit earlier on, Shudderwock is not in hand. There's no guarantee they will get it anytime soon.
No card draw left either.
Exactly, and while Shudderwock has been consistently in the driving seat so far this game, it only takes 1 turn of not clearing off your opponent's large minions for Argentina to just blow out this game. Because obviously a Primordial Drake sticking, double Divine Spirit in a fire, 32 damage, and you've won the game.
Consider.
So for this turn, PNC has a few good options, actually. They can trade in the Cabal Shadow Priest and go with a Primordial Drake, clearing up almost the entirety of Frosty's board. I think that's looking like the best way to go. I guess Cabal Shadow Priest is an option, but they can't deal with Pyromancer that way. But then again, that doesn't necessarily matter too much, so they're going to just go with it.
I mean, this just puts so much stats onto the board.
Yeah.
Like, you've even got a taunt in the way. What does this Wild Pyromancer do? They have to start off with a Healing Rain, and even then they've already played a copy of Lightning Storm.
Okay, well, Volcano will clear the board.
Yeah, it can clear the board quite easily here. But then after that, you're developing nothing other than a totem, which Primordial Drake will clear up every single time.
Yeah.
And then you have to clear that off, or you're very, very likely facing lethal. Or you have to put a taunt in the way with Saronite Chain Gang, I suppose.
The one Divine Spirit has been drawn, one in a fire has been drawn, there is a Shadow Visions in the hand, so chances of getting a second Divine Spirit are pretty high. 8, 16, 32 is what we're looking at from Primordial Drake. As Canada are now playing against Vietnam, and Vietnam just took their first win in that series. They are currently 1-1 in the HGG Swiss, so losing this series will put them down to 1-2, which will mean one more loss puts them at elimination.
Against what, sorry?
Vietnam.
Vietnam, oh, okay. You might not get that one, but chat's gonna love it, trust me.
Okay.
As the turn ending up pretty much exactly as we anticipated. Not really any other options, because against a combo priest, these healing rains just become pretty much useless. Being at 30 health is not good enough. It seems absurd, because you will just die in one fell swoop.
Obviously, Saronite Chain Gang does something to prevent that. Hagatha also does some work towards it as well. However, healing up to 7, double twice, 28. Okay.
It's not lethal available.
Not quite.
And if it's not lethal, maybe you just don't go for it. Because then if you're met with a Hex, what's your game plan?
And then a Healing Rain.
Yeah. But if you don't go for it, what's your game plan then here? You go Primordial Drake and heal up your other Primordial Drake. You've only then got 13 health on the board, so you're vulnerable to a second Volcano, at which point your hand is awful.
I'm trying to think about the possibilities here, and they're not good. It's like Shadow Visions into Powered Shield and then get Divine Spirit from that.
I mean, that is lethal on this turn.
I must consider.
But that's the only way, and we're not looking at very high chances there. I guess they could just develop the second Primordial Drake. Oh, wow.
Cue up the sax music. They're going for some kind of nonsense, it would seem, on this turn with Radiant Elementals. And whatever they're going to do, they better get doing it very soon indeed with a double Radiant Elemental play. They're setting up for something very powerful indeed.
Oh, they took the Powered Shield. They're going for it. Is the next your Divine Spirit? No, PNC doesn't look happy. It can't be. As the Elixir.
Ah,
But
that's not bad.
Still very hexable, though.
It is still very hexable, but this isn't very volcanoable anymore.
It's Earthshockable, but that doesn't do enough.
That doesn't do anywhere near enough.
So, let's see. Australia are going to have to rely on the Lightning Storm again by the looks of things. Oh, they can go Earthshock, Lightning Storm, Saronite. That's a pretty nice combination. Obviously play the minion first, see if they get something better. But Lightning is pretty helpful.
Not bad. Earthshock, Lightning Storm, Fork Lightning. Just try and blow up this whole board. I guess if the Lightning Storm rolls high on both targets, you're pretty happy anyway, though.
Yeah.
But now, for Argentina, even though they managed to stick a reasonably sized minion here, because that Shadow Visions has gone and it did not find Divine Spirit, things get a fair bit worse.
Got 3 on the important ones. And these Saronites, again, just being a huge pain for PNC. Can't quite fight through them.
And now we're starting to enter the possibility where PNC very well may just have to throw down these buffs on one minion and hope it doesn't get hexed and hope it doesn't get volcanoed.
Okay, so one Hex had been used already, right? And that's and one Volcano. I don't like his chances if he goes with that. However, I'm not really seeing a turn in which he doesn't drop Primordial Drake here. It looks like that's the only option. Primordial Drake, trade in the Primordial Drake, heal it back up again.
And then what happens? You're met with Volcano and you lose? So I guess you just have to hope it's not there.
Well, there are still other minions he can draw, right? Like if his next draw is Ysera, then...
Yeah, that's a good point. Or if his next draw is Lyra.
Yeah.
Like, Lyra is always a potential out because ridiculous stuff can occur with that card. As well, we've been talking about the potential cards that could punish this play for Argentina. They're not there. There's no Hex, there's no Volcano, no way to clear off these minions, which means, for the moment at least, if a Divine Spirit can be found, something truly devastatingly powerful could happen for Argentina. But there is that Shudderwock, which we said was nowhere in sight for Frosty, and all of a sudden, victory looks like it could be in sight because of that Shudderwock.
However, unless I'm mistaken, no life drinkers have been played by Frosty yet, which, you know, isn't the be-all and end-all. They can still start going with Shudderwocks, but because there's a Grumble in the pool, they're never going to be guaranteed to develop a big threatening board. They could just end every turn with one Shudderwock on the board and no damage done. Though they will be putting out a load of freezes every single turn thanks to the Glacial Shard, which in itself will make it difficult for Argentina to win this game.
Yeah, I guess the combo is not quite there yet. But a whole bunch of stuff on the board, I'd still probably take that.
And just, you know, as long as the Shudderwock gets bounced over and over again, then they're just freezing the entire board every turn.
Yeah.
PNC just can't do anything in that position. They can deal 16 damage right now, but that's not enough.
So crazy that in this game where Australia feel like they've had every answer consistently, PNC has still had many outs for lethal so far this game. That's just what this deck does. But Acolyte of Pain is most assuredly not that answer. But having said that, I do expect to see the Acolyte of Pain come down here as a play against Volcano, because then all of a sudden your opponent has to draw you 3 cards if they do want to clear off this very large minion.
Yeah, that's true.
And they're clearly thinking here with the possibility of playing Twilight Acolyte as well as the Acolyte of Pain. Do they go for that to try and play around Volcano? Does that put enough health on the board to fight back against the potential Volcano?
Ultimately, they don't have anything else to do. This doesn't play around the Volcano. Well, I mean, like you said, the Acolyte being on the board itself sort of plays around Volcano.
Right.
As it's go time, Shudderwock #1 going to come down. And again, we've established the chances are very high. There are 3 Psionic Chain Gangs in the pool. There's 1 Zola. There's 1 Grumble. The chance of it being bounced either with Zola or Grumble, which is all Frosty needs, is very high. Potentially 120%.
Does Shudderwock definitely come down on this turn? Yeah, I guess.
What sort of question is that, Dan?
A fair point, as it does activate in the correct order.
Look at that.
Shudderwocks are plenty for Team Australia.
Disclaimer, not actually 120%, but still very likely.
Yeah.
However, as I said, no life drinkers, which isn't really the end of the world in this matchup, because how does PNC actually win from here?
It's not looking great, to be perfectly honest. As the Grumble going first there is perfect. It's going to be leaving 4 6/3s on the board here, which are going to demand an answer, or that will just be pretty much lights out on the very next turn.
There's no dragon in hand to activate the second Duskbreaker if that gets drawn. So I'm not entirely sure what the answer is, Derek.
It's looking like this might actually just be game. After PNC went Argentina went 2-0 up. They throw down the concede, and after a 3-0 reverse sweep by Australia, they bring back this incredibly close series. And they've done it. They get to stay in the global games. They've eliminated Argentina.
We even got to see how happy little Skype man looked there at the victory. No, that was a great performance all across the board. It's very easy for a team in the Hearthstone Global Games to start to get disheartened when they are, 0 and 2 down. But that reverse sweep sort of tells the story it needed to tell, and Australia will be continuing by the skin of their teeth in this tournament. But that is the end of Argentina in this run, which again, with players such as PNC and Nagudan in, it's quite a surprise.
That is such a powerhouse to be eliminated from this tournament so early on, and my commiserations go out to them. It's a fantastic community of players, and really just, I suppose Brazil could take that claim now, but it really feels like the hub of Hearthstone in South America.
Let's take a look at the series one more time that we just watched. And there you go, a devastating reverse sweep starting. Well, Nagoidan and PNC were the guys losing the games for Argentina. Not suggesting it's their fault, obviously it's a team effort through and through. But the matchups just started to go a little bit horribly wrong with the Warrior versus the Cube Warlock. And Australia were able to take it all the way, despite the fact that, again, according to our notes, Argentina were quite favoured coming into this.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there, but a couple of nice unfavourable matchups being taken by Team Australia there, and pretty well played series, I would say. I think for Argentina, they could maybe have given themselves more outs with the Warrior against the Q block by being a bit more aggressive with the Brawl. But even having said that, it was such a dire situation, there probably wasn't a way back in.
Let's look at some highlights for the series. There were quite a lot of them, if I remember rightly, as we look all the way back to game number 1 there, where Argentina were able to develop this devastating board before the Psychic Scream could even come down. Just setting up the guaranteed 2-turn lethal.
Yeah, very nicely played couple of games by Argentina. I really liked their play in the first game, just pushing their advantage and not overcommitting into potential board clears from their opponent. And this game was just pretty much a slaughter.
Oh man, it was both Mountain Giants, both Twilight Drake took
Yeah.
Reaver into Gul'dan later on. There was no way Australia were ever winning this one.
In the latest games in this series, there was some pretty impressive play from Australia to take this game back, as I believe the next game we're going to see after a swift lethal is delivered here will be the Aggro Mage up against the Hunter, which was a surprising matchup in my opinion for Australia to take.
No, we've skipped that one entirely,
Right.
Derek. But yes, I guess the game was so fast and so surprising that we don't have any highlights from it. But yes, that was a surprise, and again, it partly comes down to the power of the egg that Argentina didn't deal with, enabling Akamaker to activate it several times and just get that powerful board that the Mage couldn't keep up with. And then there was this quite painful to watch matchup, actually, where the Q block is devastatingly favoured against Argentina's Taunt Warrior. As much as PNC tried, there was really not much he could do here.
Yeah, there wasn't indeed. And now the final game of the series, which was a really surprising one, in my opinion. And still for PNC, they had many outs there along the way to potentially take back that game. A Divine Spirit in a timely fashion would have pulled it back. A very nail-biting way to close it out and to eliminate Argentina from the global games.
Big congratulations for Australia, though. This is their moment. I'm sure they will be enjoying it, and they will be preparing once the expansion launches next week. They will be testing out all of the decks, making sure they're up to scratch when the HGG resumes in a few weeks' time. But yeah, for Derek and myself, that's us done until then. So enjoy the expansion launch, and we will see you soon after. But next up, we have New Zealand versus Taiwan, both of which are 2-0 in the Swiss, fighting to join that prestigious 3-0 spot alongside Brazil and the other teams. So we'll be back in just a few moments.